Okay, so let's start with WTO. अभी तो लिंक गया है 1 मिनट में. World Trade Organization. What do we know about World Trade Organization? Supranational entity है और global, not bilateral trade. That's why it is made, not bilateral trade. And what else? It has not evolved from Bretton Woods. Yeah. So Bretton Woods, IMF, World Bank, and then there was ITO, International Trade Organization, to which US did not show any interest because of various reasons. So it declined. And then later on in 1950s, a need was felt that we really need to do something about regulation of international trade, correct? Because international trade can be, regulated by the governments in various capacities. And all of it is very detrimental for free market. Now, you can always argue, why do we even need free market? But I hope there is a consensus now that the best way to organize and support an economy is to allow the economy free access of demand and supply. So, I mean, all the discussion will be in the liberal and neoliberal framework and not really questioning ki free market to aur bhi zyada kharab hai types. That is not the point that we'll discuss. All right. So if you look at some of the easier ways to understand as to why any kind of protectionism can be bad for the economy, the best way to see is through Indian example itself. I mean, we don't have to go anywhere else. If you look at, if there is any way that the market, the domestic market, through various mechanisms which we'll understand today, a lot of them, is controlled, there are various ill effects. First ill effect is that it develops inefficiencies in the modes of production, correct? So for example, inefficiency means what? If you do not allow, let's say, worst form of protectionism is you close your borders, like you become a North Korea. Now, you must have seen enough number of documentaries on North Korea to understand what is the standard of life of people of North Korea, correct? Limited number of choices in what they can consume, limited number of choices in terms of services that they are exposed to, correct? And so obviously that is to the detriment of, first and foremost, the people, consumers, correct? Because first, in the local market and local production is never exposed to the global competition. So because of the lack of competition, you are never forced to innovate, correct? And this lack of innovation would be like, there is just either it is generally in the form of monopoly creation, or even if it is not monopoly, there is a kind tendency between the local players to form an association ki tu bhi mat kar, main bhi nahi karunga, apan dono आधा आधा बांट लेते हैं, because there is no third player from across the globe who has the capacity to take away a share of the pie, right? So because of n number of reasons, and overall it has been seen that the protectionist economy ultimately decline for various reasons. One of the reasons that they decline is that they create monopolies, and the monopolies ultimately push the prices so high that it becomes very difficult for the consumer to even buy limited number of goods that are already available, correct? And so that is not a topic of discussion. The idea is to make you realize that any kind of bottleneck that is put by the government in the way of import and export is very bad and terrible idea. The question is, in what capacity and in what ways the government can follow protectionism, and that generally we understand through, first and foremost, tariff barriers, right? And non-tariff barriers. While it is very, very easy to understand tariff barriers, and that is why General Agreement on Trade and Tariff deals only with tariffs. So first thing to understand is that the first consensus that 50 odd countries had initially in 1950s was just to regulate the amount of tariff that the countries put on their borders to prevent incoming goods. That's it, manufactured goods, not services. So if this is, let's say, a national economy, and this is the import that is coming in, this is the port. Tariff barrier is simply that some proportion of the price has to be paid extra. So it's like chungi tax, that we are the dadas and we will force you to pay us this minimum amount of money if you want to access our market. By doing this, the idea is to make them a little bit more expensive than the same competing products that are available inside these boundaries. Correct? Because these are the people who are paying us income tax. These are the people who are giving us votes. These are the people ultimately whose production form the part of the national income and GDP. You are not doing any of that to us. This product is not giving anything. So it has to be at least at the same level as they are. So if, let's say, there is an import of automobile, most of the automobile in the same engine category, in the same size category, are available between, let's say, X lakh rupees. And if in the same category you come with X by 2, it's our duty to make it X at least. And in most categories, X plus Y. That is why it is called a tariff barrier. It is the most easiest way, or it is the most easiest one to resolve because of the notification that every government has to bring out a list. And so it becomes very, very easy to target it. And that's why the first consensus we had, it was about reduction in tariff barriers. The problem is that the other kinds of barriers are even more detrimental, but then they are in fact invisible to most people, right? So for example, the one non-tariff barrier which all of us know, quota barriers. Quota means that you create a list. In this particular category, only this many items can be imported in a particular period of time. So you create a list of luxury cars and you say that only 100 cars are allowed. And in order to import the car, you will have to get a license from the government, and that becomes the easiest way to understand. But if now let's discuss what are the various ways through which the non-tariff barriers can exist, you will be surprised to see. Country understood after signing general agreement on trade and tariff that it is now impossible for us to prevent import by levying import duties. So what can we do? What can we do is that instead of notifying a tariff, what we can do is that we can specify minimum import price. This is not a tariff barrier. We are not importing any extra duty. Duty is just 5%, but all we are saying is that if there is a product category, and let's say it is grain, food grain, you cannot import rice at less than a price of 200 rupees per kg. That is not a tariff barrier. Tariff is 5%, which is allowed under GATT. But then that is a minimum import price. So minimum import price is the next level of invisible sort of barriers. That's why they are categorized under non-tariff barriers. But then also this is something that you will have to notify, right? So it will be easily revealed. Ye to bahut sari countries kar rahi hain. What you can do is that you can not facilitate the trade. Trade facilitation. What do you mean by trade facilitation? The ship docks on the port and the custom officers inspect what is the flag of the ship. Where is it coming from? Sir, it's coming from Guangzhou. Achha, China se aa rahi hai. Okay, so give us the papers, we'll process it, and only then you can unload the goods that you have. And then the ship is not hearing back from the government for next 1 month. और पता चलता है कि अंदर एग्रीकल्चर कमोडिटी थी, खराब हो गई. By delaying the processing of the import, you can put invisible barrier. You don't have to notify it. And then obviously it is a deterrence and it is not a tariff barrier, but you can imagine what kind of barrier it is. I mean, वो कंपनी कहेगी भाई तू मेरे से 200 import duty charge कर लेता, इससे better तो था. Is it not possible? So that is why trade facilitation or lack of trade facilitation is another kind of non-tariff barrier, right? Then what countries do? Countries say that import import duty is 5%, compliant with MFN. We'll come to that. We facilitated your trade as fast as other countries, no problem in that. It enters here, but then as soon as it is about to enter the market, we say, haven't you heard about the recent notification by Ministry of Commerce and Industry, where it says that in this market, 50% of the manufacturing has to be done locally. By forcing the supplier to manufacture a fixed component locally, you can put a non-tariff barrier. So you're saying there is no import duty. Trade facilitation is at the fastest level. We have not levied any kind of minimum import price. And so the only now, because your product is 100% manufactured and it's sourced from US, we're sorry to say that it breaches our minimum local, what do you say? What do you call it? Local manufacturing. Have you heard about it? Minimum local production. Have you ever heard about any scheme of India which requires local manufacturing? Online people? Indian defense manufacturing policy, India announced defense indigenization policy. हाँ 2022 में उसमें in almost all the categories you can manufacture it. So India will allow Boeing manufacturing, but the Boeing will have to manufacture in India. That's what you saw day before yesterday. Modi, along with Boeing CEO, went to Karnataka to inaugurate the factory. So now India will allow the private participation in defense, which was not possible earlier. But then the planes that Boeing will supply to India have to be made in. So minimum domestic requirement is the key term. By mandating local manufacturing or certain percentage of the output value addition, you can always put a non-tariff barrier by saying that no, certain percentage have to be made in India. Correct? That's why a lot of people say that make in India violates WTO. Is this point clear? Then obviously, various ways in which the production is artificially is subsidies. Subsidies act as a non-tariff barrier because they reduce the overall manufacturing cost for the local manufacturers. So the cost of production comes down, and because the cost of production comes down, the imported material will never be able to compete with the local, because local becomes cheaper because of the artificial government subsidies. This is the most sought after way in which China violates WTO. We'll come to why China is problem. Then other ways through which it can be done is it's just not about protectionism. It's also about making important material available to the global community. So for example, there is let's say a drought in some sub-Saharan country, or because of war, their food has to be supplied. India does not like that fact. So what India will do, India will levy a minimum export price. Now, minimum export price can, let's say there is a very high inflation in India. High inflation means either the supply is low or demand is very high. That's why, let's say, the prices of certain agricultural commodities shooting up. Now, in that situation, if there are exporters of the same commodity, the supply will reduce even further, which will push the inflation even higher in India. India will say, no, you cannot export it. And if you really want to export it, if it is that profitable, we are levying this minimum price below which you cannot export it. And that is used to deter the export. But the problem is that export can be controlled in various ways, which is also a barrier to the trade. For example, when in order to prevent supply of arms to certain countries, US creates CATSA. It is an export barrier. So export barrier is exercised in different ways. You specify the commodities that cannot be exported. You levy minimum export price, or you levy destination countries And then that becomes a non-tariff barrier. Online people, is this making sense? Yeah. So various ways in which this can be done is this. Also, now when the global supply chain has so diversified that the mobile phones that you hold in your hand probably has traveled more than the number of countries you will travel in your life, probably more than 20. So the problem is that you can't really know where is the value addition that has actually taken place. So when the resources come from Africa, let's say lithium, or from China, silicon comes from again China. The chip is made in Taiwan. Chip travels to China. Everything travels to China for assembly, but then from different countries. The software or the patent is held by Alphabet if it is an Android phone. Apple again with so you that's the question is, in this kind of a complex situation, how do you actually calculate where the maximum value addition has taken place? So when you get an iPhone for 1 lakh rupees, who do you think gets the maximum benefit from iPhone? China or US? No, US. The manufacturing cost of iPhone is almost the same as Samsung, but it's the technology and the patent of technology, it's the brand value that inflates the costs. There is no difference between the manufacturer. In fact, the same factories produce both. Foxconn produces both Samsung as well as Apple. So why we are discussing this in this section is because there are ingredients that are being supplied from countries A, countries B, countries C. It is being assembled in China. The software and model, which is called industrial design, and software, which is again a patent, both are held with US. So the US is Apple is not a manufacturer. Samsung is not manufacturer. They just invest in R&D. And then they design a prototype. When the prototype is finalized, they send it out to China, and then there are a whole set of companies which do the manufacturing. So Apple does not have a manufacturing facility. They just have coding facilities and some designing. Why it is important to know is that when this phone can be traced back to various countries, it is unclear as to what is the origin. And because the origin is not clear, you cannot apply any of those rules very clearly on this phone. And so the creation of rules of origin has also emerged in recent times as a non-tariff barrier. Because India, citing its security concern, can almost disband any of the products from entering their market, saying, यार तो जी चाइना में तो ये उसका हुआ है, तो ऐसा तो कोई प्रोडक्ट ही नहीं है जो चाइना से नहीं निकला है. But because of the global rules providing national security concern, keeping it as an exception, that's why India was able to ban all the imports from Pakistan. India can use the same in most of the cases in China. So when we banned so many applications like TikTok from China, there was no you can say क्या बोलते हैं उसको, liability on India, because we understood that these are Chinese apps. The servers are located in China. So you can see that we can go on and on and on and discuss so many tariff and non-tariff barriers which can prevent the free market when it comes to import and export of various goods as well as services. Services mean the game is more complex. We'll come to that when we will discuss TRIMS or TRIPS, GATTs, General Agreement on Trade in Services. Standard, so that you all know. So that's why. And it is just not about sanitary and phytosanitary methods. So for example, the standards are applicable even by specifying very harsh norms of standards. You can disband a lot of products from entering your market, correct? And phytosanitary and sanitary measures generally deal with the health hazard, correct? But then there can be safety requirements, not dealing with health also, correct? Yes. Environmental concern, human right violation. There are so many standards that can exist, which all of us know. I discuss them because that is not very obvious and we don't get to study it. So it was especially in the post Second World War era, we have one of the reasons why Second World War happened because of the trade war. Trade war happens that when borders of one country walls are a little bit higher, the another country retaliates by taking retaliatory measures and builds even a higher wall. Once that even higher wall is built, then the first country builds even a higher fort. And so that is to the detriment of the global economy, right? Climate change. And so it was agreed that something has to be done in order to rescue the global economy. And after the Second World War, we had this separation between communist countries and non-communist countries, right? And so first the agreement between all the beneficiaries of Marshall Plan led by USA, because World War II helped the most. If it helped one country, it was US. And so, although it was not a global hegemon in 1950, because you had USSR at the same time, but if you just are on this side of the Iron Curtain, it was just US. US was propping up the global economy. So, whatever US had to say, no one could deny it. And so, that has been the reason why Bretton Woods agreements have lasted, because of the interest that is shown by the US in perpetuating these organizations. Now that US itself is losing interest, you will see that slowly and gradually they are declining. So because of the US capacity and capability to force all these countries, because all these countries had taken massive loans from US, not only during the war, where they had major imports, after the war in resurrecting their economies, they had the full US support, and so they were obligated to you as to whatever US had to say. So what came into generally as a consensus became general agreement on trade and tariff. All right. Also, one of the ways in which you can create a tariff barrier is by devaluing your currency. I mean, this list is never ending. Do you know how devaluing your currency can help? Putting kaise Harshita? Import become expensive.
Exports cheaper.
Imports become expensive and exports become cheaper. So the domestic manufacturers are helped in that way. So that is all. What came to be known as General Agreement on Trade and Tariff for the first time created a global set of rules, regulations, and there are certain aspects which have to be understood because they were as it is adopted by WTO. What the rule said that first and foremost, let's first focus on tariff barriers. क्योंकि हमने देखा they are very simple. You know, as the good enters, immediately you come to know what is the percentage that you have to pay, and so that is extremely visible on the face of the border. Correct? Wherever you approach India from, and if you are not Indian, you will be attracted with certain minimum percentage that you have to pay, right? And so, first thing is that all the countries will have to, who become a member, have to agree to a non-discrimination clause. Non-discrimination means you are not going to discriminate. How do you ensure that the countries do not discriminate? They are not differentiating between the domestic manufacture, domestic products, where the source of the origin say that it is your own product, and not between the imported commodity. How do you do that? Most favored nation is one of the component. So if this is the border, in what ways you can discriminate? In one way you can discriminate is as the border, right? That is import duty. But in another way, you can discriminate it is within the borders also, once it has entered. So both have to be taken into account. And so non-discrimination clause says that there is something that is going to be most favored nation. What do you mean by most favored nation? Is that it is a designation that all the members will give to each other. So if there are 50 members to the General Agreement on Trade and Tariff, all of them are each other's favorite. What does that mean? That means that whatever is the minimum tariff that is applicable in this jurisdiction when a good enters, that will automatically become applicable to all the MFN states. So let's say, uh, take a category of pen. Let's say pen have to be imported. So this is a country, India. So far, before entering into General Agreement on Trade and Tariff, it had levied 20%, no, 40%, because if you see, before trade and tariff, general tariffs were 40%, right? So let's say India had applied 40% import duty on pens from USA and 20% import duty when the pen was from, let's say, Canada, and 10% when it was from yes, very good, बांग्लादेश. उस समय तो बांग्लादेश था नहीं ना. हाँ समझ लो, रशिया से तो पेन आएगा ही नहीं. So, what does this mean? If you become India, as soon as it becomes member of most favored nation, now this already is a part of General Agreement on Trade and Tariff. US, Canada is a part of General Agreement on Trade and Tariff. However, Russia is not a part of General Agreement on Trade and Tariff in 1950s. USSR was not a part of. What it says is that irrespective of that, if this is the minimum that India imposes on pencil, that automatically will become applicable on imports from US. So what is the minimum that you are giving? You have to give that minimum to everyone.
Even if that minimum does not apply to an MFN.
No. For every commodity, what is the minimum import duty that you're subjecting other imports to? That has to be extended to every MFN status. So now, after the signing of GATT, the pencil from US will attract 10%, pencil from Canada will import 10%, pen from Canada, but Russia might import 40%. It can be reversed because Russia is not a part of General Agreement on Trade and Tariff. All other countries can attract varying amount of import, not the members of GATT. So, but this is just about entering the border. There can be a lot of discrimination once the product enters within the market, correct? And for that, another obligation that had to be agreed by all the members was, so this is most favored nation. Yes. We'll come to that. That is the third component. Second is the clause of national treatment. National treatment is that once you have ensured that they attract minimum that is possible in that jurisdiction, you will say that after they have entered, अब तो तुमने ले लिया import duty ना, अब तो खुश रहो. Now within the market, there cannot be any differentiation between imported and the locally manufactured good. Once they have entered the market, national treatment shall be subjected to all the commodities. Correct? So, for example, you know that there is a sales tax, there is an excise tax, interstate tax. You cannot notify differential taxes for local products and imported products. So you can't say sales tax on imported watches. Sales tax on imported watches would be 20% and sales tax on locally manufactured would be 10%. You can't say that. If the sales tax on a particular commodity is X, it has to be X entirety of the commodity, entirety of that vertical, not separate. What Piyush was asking is that, what if, is there any expectation on what can be the minimum import duty or maximum import duty? The answer is no, but then there is a clause of reciprocity, which ensures that slowly and gradually it shows a declining trend, because just having these two clauses does not mean that the import duty will keep on reducing. So India can say, मैं तो सब पे ही 60 लगा रहा हूँ, क्या करूँ? I'm imposing 60% import duty on every item. No, because India can't do it, because India has also signed the clause of reciprocity exactly to solve the problem of free rider. Because If India imposes 50% import duty and it meets MFN and it meets national treatment also, then US is under no obligation to reduce the import duty against India. So if India wants it to be reduced, then India will first have to reduce. So that is the mutual reinforcement of reduction. One reduces, other has to reduce. Other reduces, India has to reduce. And so that's how you see that in 30, 40 years, there until, so you can see that until Uruguay round, this is when WTO came into existence. On an average, generally, this is a weighted average. If 40% was the import duty across the globe that was attracted, by the time in less than 30 years, 40 years, it came down to less than 5%. That is a huge and substantial. And it is huge because it was observed across the globe. And it is just not one country which did it. So you can see that directly the impact of general agreement on trade and tariff. So this is just one of the clauses that we are discussing, which consists of non-discrimination. By forcing the countries to become a part of most favored nation designation, it was sort of expected that it would lead to benefits, which it did. Then forcing the countries to provide national treatment also helped. And then reciprocity is something which meant that it is ever declining. Is this point clear, online people? Yes. We'll come to that. FTAs are in violation of WTO. Free trade agreements are in violation of WTO. But because these generally include countries which are very powerful in WTO, most of the FTAs are protected. No one takes any action. That is also a problem, regional agreements. Then one is most favored nation, national in treatment, reciprocity, non-discrimination. Another one is that it set up a dispute resolution mechanism. What if a particular country has found out that it is being cheated upon? A country A promised to abide by non-discrimination, promised to abide by most favored nation, but then when the research was done, it was revealed that they have violated significant provisions, right? The question is, how will you come to know about even if there is a violation, if you don't really have access to government documents? And so in order to do that, what was forced upon every country was the complete transparency of trade policy. So it became mandatory for every country to share all the changes. First, when they will become a member of GATT, they will tell exactly, they will submit all the documents. This is our current trade policy. And whenever they will do even a minor change, the first thing that they should do is to notify General Agreement on Trade and Tariff that under these clauses, we have amended these provisions. Right? So the complete transparency is the number one obligation of all the GATT members. Because if the changes are not notified, how would the GATT know what country is taking which measure, which kind of measures, which country is taking what measures? So that became mandatory. So you tell your public, your business community about it or not, we don't care. What we care is it should reach Geneva, where we'll keep all the records. Right? So that tomorrow, if some country challenges the provisions, we should have access to the official records. Is this point clear? Okay. So then there were certain safety clauses also. Safety clauses means the exceptions that were provided to the member countries of GATT. So for example, obviously these have been retained by WTO also. We'll come to that. So first and foremost, national security. So the Raytheon or the manufacturer, I mean, Boeing, they cannot say that India has to be forced on for defense imports. They have to provide us national treatment because that comes under the national security issue. And India consider it as an integral part of. So India can't be forced to import defense products, space products. They should not be obligated to provide access to the private players, both whether Indian or foreigners. It's not one of our obligations. Also, in order to protect environment, animal health, human health, environment mainly included biodiversity. So if there is a product the disposal of that product, let's say, leads to release of carcinogenic elements in the soil, water, air. India cannot be forced. India just has to ultimately prove that it is not safe to dispose of, and that will be more than sufficient for India to do that. Okay. So this is about it. Once you became a member of General Agreement on Trade and Tariff, you had to this agreement, because a lot of aspirants are concerned whether it is binding or non-binding. What do you mean by binding or non-binding? How do you define binding obligations? So did you see any sanctions on US when it walked out of Paris Climate Deal, which is binding in nature? That's why supranational organizations are a kind of a farce. इन्फोर्समेंट की प्रॉब्लम है ना, क्योंकि इन्फोर्समेंट के लिए आप उन्हीं कंट्रीज पे ही, उनके विलिंग सबऑर्डिनेशन पे ही रिलाई करते हो, राइट? So that's why. So obviously it came into existence, and the benefits that we got, we have seen already. That is the main benefit. Also, it got resulted. It can be seen in the form of increase. This is, I don't know why the dates are not visible on this board. This is when WTO came into existence. So this is after Uruguay round, 1993, and this is the signing of. Before that, the world trade was very, very low. And after the signing of GATT, there was a consistent increase in the global trade. So how do you calculate this graph? What do you mean by world trade? Exchange of goods, total value of trade and commerce, and how it is increasing, right? What is the difference between trade and commerce? Commerce wale? किनका है? हिमांशु का है? टाइम क्या हो रहा है भाई साहब, पता नहीं, मैं नया हूं अभी. So what is trade and what is commerce? Yeah. So trade is the exchange of goods and services. Commerce is something which facilitates this trade. So for example, transport is what? Ship. Ship is a part of commerce because it facilitates something else. Banking facilities is what? Commerce, because it facilitates the trade. But manufacture is something which is a part of trade. Correct? So commerce is mainly the facilitator, mainly includes services. Okay, so what happened was that slowly and gradually, more and more number of countries started hopping on to the GATT, and they immediately started observing the benefits arising out of GATT. Correct? Especially the countries which are OECD countries, because they were the manufacturers, and so it became kind of a vehicle for capitalism. So if you become a member, you sign most favored nation, you have to abide by reciprocity, and you have to subject yourself to national treatment, which basically means that you have to allow free flow of American products. And so slowly and gradually across the globe, you will see increasing penetration of Western manufactured products, correct? Slowly and gradually, to the extent that even when India was before LPG era, we had Coke in our country, right? We had, you can name any of the category of products, we had all of them in our country. But what happened in the meanwhile is that there were certain changes that were happening which necessitated a relook on GATT also. First and foremost is the fact that it became very clear after 1985 that the other camp is going to collapse. And so the only truth that will prevail is that free market is the winner. And so whoever opposes free market collapses. That gave even more power to USA even before USSR could collide. So what it did is that it started preparing for the future collapse of USSR even before USSR had collapsed. And so what US and other such developed countries like Germany, Japan, they realized that it's fine that tariff has been taken care of, but when they used to meet in Geneva, they saw that what their products are mainly facing are the issues related to non-tariff barriers. Some of the non-tariff barriers that we have not discussed became the most important concern for the countries now. Can you think of any other non-tariff barrier? इतने सारे हमने discuss कर लिए. Can you give us some more? How can you prevent entry of imported goods beyond this? हाँ? तो standard तो हो गया. Import substitution, obviously, how do you do import substitution? How do you do import substitution is one of the, not exactly that. So for example, a country like India, come again, please.
IPR, intellectual property rights.
Yes, a country like India never protected IPR the way these developed countries trusted India to protect it. But it was not a part of GATT. So it was not a part of the Indian agreement, right? And so what India did is that, so the foreign authors' books would come to India, just one copy, and then 10,000 copies the next day available in DU campus. And no, and so that frustrates. And so why would any domestic player even try to enter into Indian market? ऐसा नहीं कि उनके एंटर करने के बिना हम चोरी नहीं कर सकते. We can do that, but then it is costly. You'll at least have to go to US to procure that, bring that. The entry of the foreign products with full marketing will also create a new market, and that can be hopped on by the people who plagiarize. This is just about intellectual content, which is generally protected under copyright. It extends to patents also. And so slowly and gradually, they started realizing that the lack of protection of intellectual property right, which has so many components to it. It has copyright, it has patents, it has industrial designs, it has trademark. So they realized that the import of Adidas shoes has increased, Nike shoes has increased, but ulta tick wala bhi bik raha hai. Adibas bhi bik raha hai, or then there are PEPCI also there in the market. And so they started realizing that people think that we are consuming American product, but the revenue is going to Indian players. So this is not a tariff barrier, and we have no international agreement to prevent this from happening. And if we don't prevent this, what is even good to have a most favored? Is it then any helpful? People will stop consuming it क्योंकि वो तो जो उल्टा टिक वाला है वो तो सस्ते में बन रहा है जलंधर में. And so because of these reasons, IPR also what they started realizing, क्या हो गया? Yeah, we should tell her. Or her or him. Who is he? The name is not clear. I'll mute. No, I can't mute. ये कैसे हो गया? Okay, muted. Yeah. Then there exists the public sector undertakings. You allow the foreign manufacturers to be extended MFN, and as soon as you go there, you see the same categories being produced at a very artificially low level. You know that that company is loss making, not financially viable. If it had been a private entrepreneurship, it would have collapsed like Byju's. But then it is not, because the government is just fueling it budget after budget. So how do you compete with that kind of an initiative? So Air India, if it was a private venture, I mean, it would have survived because initially it was profitable, but just the fact that it has been perpetuated for 50 years in losses, it's impossible for any private player. So how do you deal with that? So the problems like these started emerging, and so they thought that the next push to the liberalization should come. Wait करते हैं, let USSR collapse, तब इतनी सारी countries वहां से free होंगी from the clutches of these communist leaders. Let's wait for them क्योंकि वो तो अब नया market penetrate करना है हमें, because they are outside the bounds of US products. So non-tariff barrier, non-inclusion of non-tariff barrier became very obvious that you have to do something about it. Also, the general agreement on trade and tariff is itself very clear that it did not deal with the services. The problem was that on one hand, the trade in goods projected the industrial revolution countries and later on US and Japan to the to become the high net worth individual countries or very rich countries, OECD countries, now they were themselves shifting towards service sector. And at the same time, the development was shifting to China. So they're like, goods protect kar liya. We have protected the goods, but then it's not going to help us because now we are not manufacturing any goods. Goods are being manufactured in China. What now we derive maximum revenue is from service like softwares, because by that time the dot-com bubble has, I mean, internet had already come in 1991 92 in US, and so there was websites that were coming in 2 3 years. Also the Yahoo had come, Amazon was started in 1994. So they realized that e-commerce is now going to become the next boom that we have to bet upon. What is e-commerce? You don't produce anything new in e-commerce. You just enable access. You just create platforms through which people, so basically what you have to now allow is the penetration of services and remove any kind of barrier which the countries have propped up in the way of the supply of services. So now the focus has to shift on services. Also, when the general agreement on trade and tariff was was acting for 40 years, there was, it did not talk or anything about agricultural commodities. And so it had allowed developing countries to initiate various kinds of domestic supports to their farmers, which then really made it difficult for other developed countries which increasingly relied on agriculture and related production, in which America is the last. But then you had Australia, you had New Zealand. What did you not understand? It is, but it is not the most, because US has other sources of income also. But then there were other countries which had, yeah, huh. So and but there was no conversation about agriculture and it was looking very imminent that the kind of domestic support these countries have given to their farmers, they have led to that they were based on productionist approach. The idea was to just maximize the production, and now they are building up buffer stocks. And the buffer stocks are so huge in amount, volume, that any day they will offload that into the international market. And that it was like a nightmare for the developed countries that any day when India decides कि अब तो सड़ रहा है, अब तो फेंको इसको बाहर, the international prices will crash and our economies will go into recession. And so the general agreement on trade and tariff does not even talks about agriculture. No commodity related to agriculture. No commodity which is basically under the primary sector was dealt by general agreement on trade and tariff. And so they started negotiating, building some kind of mechanisms for the future. Also, the problem was that while it gave a lot of result, dispute resolution was almost dysfunctional. It still is, but for various reasons, for different reasons. We'll come to that. There are some certain procedural problems. US has basically stopped, has created a lot of bottleneck. At that point of time, the problem was in the substantive clause of dispute resolution of general agreement on trade and tariff. The problem was that any country can take up dispute. Let's say country A takes up a particular dispute against country B into this. The panel was not a permanent, like a tribunal, like a judges, which exist permanently. So on a case-to-case basis, a new panel will be formed to look into each and every specific dispute. The problem was that the GATT Council, the name was GATT Council, which was responsible for looking into all the disputes, required the membership of these two countries as well. So if India is taking up a particular violation clause of GATT against US, there will be a set of people which will include 10 to 12 members, but it will also include India as well as US into the panel, which will give the judgment. And it has to be done on consensus. So can you understand the fruitlessness of this provision? Can it be fruitful? Can ever India will accept that it has violated when US takes it right? It's not possible. Also, at the same time, another kind of non-tariff barrier which had created problem, which we have not discussed so far, is that countries like India, what they started doing is that they had become the biggest source of consumption expenditure through government procurements. We understand that economy is pushed through various expenditures. So if you calculate the GDP, in how many ways you calculate GDP? 3 ways. What are the 3 ways? Value addition. So it's a total sum of value added of the final goods and services, not the intermediate. Second is income methods. You add everyone's income, you can calculate the GDP. You add everyone's expense because one's expenses in other one's income, correct? So major source that obviously India is a consumption driven. So 60% of the push comes from consumption expenditure. But then 30 to 40%, remaining 40% comes from government expenditure. And the government, it looked like, was creating various sections to procure only the local products. So for example, if central government has almost 50 lakh officers, 50 lakh employees, not officers, 16 lakh are just railway. And let's say central government has to acquire a particular commodity which is to be used by every 50 lakh employee. They can always create and design rules of tendering in such a way that ultimately the person who is being selected is a local one without violating any WTO clauses. So you can do a market research and you can find out what is the length above which there is no pen which is imported from US. And immediately, let's say, for example, you notify that to local member, इससे बड़ी pen बना लो, मैं tender निकालने जा रहा हूँ. So you say the pen should not be less than 5-7 centimeter or inches, whatever. Then you can go into technology that it should be leak proof. There are 2 ways you can create leak proof. Very complicated, but you can always design such rules that you can negate any of the imported or importers or foreign manufacturers from bidding into the government procurement programs. So this was also, they realized that the developing countries, although have reduced the tariff barriers, but they have found a way to bypass it. And so it looks like it is of no use. So we need to recreate. And by that time, the globalization was full on acceleration. 2-3 years passed by. By that time, USSR was already, it had collapsed. And so there, US becomes global hegemon in a unipolar world. And so whatever it wanted, it had to sway not just in the Western world, but now it was increasingly was able to form consensus even in the non-Western world to bring everyone on the board. And so then they started with what is known as Uruguay round, the finally, which resulted into creation of WTO. Why the name had to be changed is because of the wide nature of the treaties that were on board now on offering. That's why the name had to be changed. Because World Trade Organization is, although a successor of General Agreement on Trade and Tariff, but then it is much more wider. So while WTO was created, it carried forward GATT in itself. So obviously, most of the things, MFN and everything will be carried out. But then various other treaties were included. So when you become a member of WTO, you have to sign most of the treaties. Correct? What are the treaties? What are those treaties?
Agreement on
Agreement on-
agriculture,
Agreement on agriculture, yes.
tax and trims.
वो एग्रीकल्चर के ही अंदर आता है. हाँ, ठीक है, you're right. So the first thing that they understood that now we need to create a dispute resolution mechanism which is robust. So we need to reform that. So the old dispute resolution mechanism went away and a new dispute resolution came into existence. We'll talk about that. What is the problem there? Then what they understood that violation of intellectual property rights is a cause for concern. So if you want to become a member of WTO, we will not allow you unless and until you allow you sign the TRIPS or trade related aspects of intellectual property rights, right? So you will have to guarantee that you will protect these. So you can see that most of the treaties that are being signed. Then if you want to become a member of WTO, you will also have to sign trade related investment measures, which is what takes care of what you see as FII and FDIs. Trade related investment measures. So it is just about investment. So just about capital flows. Correct? Then if you want to become a member of WTO, no, you cannot become it unless and until you sign one more agreement, which is General Agreement on Trades in Services, GATS. So what was earlier just a GATT was suddenly widened into GATS. So you can see that the problem was that you did not have services. GATS came into existence. The earlier one was not able to take care of a lot of non-tariff barriers. TRIPS was taken care of, IPR, correct? Then investment was not a part of that General Agreement on Trade and Tariff. Now investments were subjected to TRIMS, correct? Then dispute resolution mechanism was altered, revamped, correct? And obviously, agreement on agriculture was negotiated way early on, but then it became formally the part of WTO, agreement on agriculture, correct? Let's start with agreement on agriculture.
And all the other non-tariff barriers are still outside still remain outside the ambit of WTO.
No, most of them have been covered in various aspects. जैसे मान लो local sourcing है, local sourcing will be taken care of by, so there was a modification on GATT also. We'll talk about that. GATT को भी modify किया, और इनके through you will take care of most of the. Then we also had plant varieties. You have heard about plant varieties? Plant varieties convention, जो PepsiCo वाला केस है, protection of plant varieties, आलू वाला, क्या है केस? आलू वाला पता है? ऐसे तो ऑप्शन नहीं आएगा ना, आलू वाला केस,
वो लेस
मेहंदी वाला केस, तो तुलसी वाला केस, प्रोटेक्शन ऑफ प्लांट वैरायटीज,
Lace chips.
लेस. Yeah, so because these, especially the fast food providers, they have modified the agriculture system. तो जो मैकडोनल्ड्स एक ही तरह का आलू दुनिया भर में यूज करता है, वो इतने बड़े होते हैं, तो उससे जो आपको वो चिप्स मिलता है ना, प्रिंगल्स भी ऐसे ही, बिकॉज दे, if you want to for industry like food, if you want to fasten the process, you have to reduce the parameters. तो जैसे कि आलू हम घर में खाते हैं, एक छोटा है, एक बड़ा, एक बड़ा है, तो आप उसको कैसे प्रोसेस करोगे फास्टली? सो यू हैव क्रिएटेड अ मशीन, but machine works only well when it is fed with the same size of potato every time. So they created a new variety and they have patented that variety with protected under this. So only बाहर है, ये अंदर लग रहा है मेरे को आवाज. हाँ, drill है, sure. Okay, so this was the, I think there was one more agriculture.
इंफॉर्मेशन टेक्नोलॉजी
नहीं, वो तो अभी भी बाहर है. कौन सा रोड टैप?
एक एसपीएस एग्रीमेंट भी होता है.
कौन सा?
एसपीएस एग्रीमेंट वो
Sanitary and phytosanitary. Yes, okay, yeah, sanitary and phytosanitary. इसके बारे में सबको पता कैसे होता है? Everyone knows about sanitary and no one knows GATS. हाँ, अच्छा, EU वाले में कवर किया, इंडिया EU में मैंगो एंड राइस एंड वेरियस अदर, मतलब पेस्टिसाइड वाला मामला ना. अच्छा, दैट्स व्हाई यू नो. मैं को सरप्राइज था, मैंने कहा यार
और
ये
सर
तो
एक और सब्सिडीज एंड काउंटरवेलिंग मेजर्स एग्रीमेंट.
countervailing measure is an exception. Anti-dumping is an exception. We have already covered that. It is an exception. अभी आ रहे हैं अपन. अब ये देखो. Let's talk about agreement on agriculture. So agreement on agriculture, it said that there are various ways in which agriculture production can ये अपने यहाँ हो रहा है क्या? ये कर, oh, right. So it said that first, let's create a list of all the kind of help that the government is extending to their own farmers. Correct? You can categorize all the help that comes from into various categories. So let's do that exercise on our own. Where do you think creation of infrastructure in rural areas will go? Government funds the canal program. Where should it go? Is it, let's say, if we are trying, if we are out there to categorize the subsidies, what do you think is the nature of the infrastructure creation? Does it
Green box.
distort the market?
No.
It does not, because the canal can be used not only for agriculture purpose, but non-agriculture purpose also. And the same canal can be used by all production of all kinds of grains and vegetables and orchards. And it can be used to feed the people to drink water also. So that's why capital expenditure on infra is one category. Let's say the government funds 10 lakh crore rupees of research and development on creating supply chain in rural areas, godowns. Do you think it's market distorting? So godowns is not market distorting, because godowns can be used by everyone, right? And just the fact that you have created a godown does not means that the farmers are going to grow just because they have to fill up the godowns, right? So this is a domestic support which is not really going to incentivize production in a particular way. Government carries out wide level of agriculture extension programs. Agriculture extension का मतलब क्या होता है? Increasing area नहीं extension मतलब the services have to be extended. So for example, outreach. So you will go and inform them about weather conditions. You will do the soil testing. कि देखो आपकी soil में ये deficient है, वो मत डालो. Do you think it is going to distort the market? No, it's just an information, and it is going to make the agriculture more viable, no doubt. Because if to begin with, the farmer knows that what is the kind of grain that will best grow on this particular soil, then it is the best. So also let's say that the government is transferring 10,000 rupees every month in account of every farmer. Is it destroying or distorting the market? So PM Kisan, yes. Extension of any kind of credit to the agriculture or agriculturists is one. But then there are other kinds of domestic support that is given, right? What are the other kinds of agriculture support? एम्बर वाला कलर ही नहीं है यहाँ पे. कैसा दिखता है एम्बर? ऐसा दिखता है कुछ वायलेट टाइप का होता है ना. ऑरेंजिश होता है क्या?
Amber is yellowish orange.
येलोइश ऑरेंज ये है क्या? ये सही है ना? ये ओके चलो. Then let's say the canal water that is being supplied to that was built was fine, but then every water that is being supplied is free of cost for only producers of wheat and rice. Now you are clearly differentiating between the crops. What you are saying is that the seeds, fertilizers, pesticide that any farmer would need to grow rice and wheat will be subsidized. Urea is subsidized in India. Now, obviously, when you're going to determine what is the production that you should do in this particular season, you will obviously be tilted towards rice and wheat. Not in any case in this case. All that is written in green. But now it is tilting your choice to incentivize production of a particular crop by artificially deflating the prices of input, making the production cost easier. Also, when the government says itna to de diya, uske baad agar produce karoge to assured acquisition by the government. So it is like in form of one of the ways is minimum support price. Obviously, so far you have not distorted the market. But as soon as you float the MSP, so far it is not a market distortion directly. But why it is a market distortion in various ways is that first and foremost, it is a market distortion because it takes away a lot of net sown area from other crops and it diverts it to the preferential production of particular crops, artificially inflating pulses, artificially inflating other kinds of food grains which could be needed by the people. Also, when it reaches the market, not the fact that the government acquires 100%, the problem is that even if 1% is left in the market, the private player will have to pay the MSP equivalent, even though that is not the international price. If the government notifies 22 rupees per kg for rice, let's say MSP, even if the demand and supply should dictate 17 rupees, there is no other option for the private trader to procure it at the minimum support prices. Right. So that in these ways, it not only forget about international distortion, it first and foremost distorts the local market. That's why it is not liked by WTO. Also, why it is not liked by WTO even more is that when WTO did research, it found out the kind of buffer that India and China they are building up, and it was realized that this is more than that they need to feed their country for 3 to 4 years. So obviously, if a country has built up food grains, which is more than 3 years of their overall requirement, that government could literally feed us for 3 years for everyone, then at some point of time, they will determine that we need to replenish this stock because now it is 3 to 4 years old, it is rotting. You cannot forever preserve grains. So you will first have to offload this and equivalent quantity has to be reacquired. When you will offload it, the government will offload it, and that will lead to the crashing of market because in the international market, there is no minimum support. So international market responds to demand and supply. And that's when that has been the fear to which India has always guaranteed that they will never offload it and they will use it in COVID-like situations, right? So that is what is called green box. This becomes amber box. And then there is third one, which is called blue box. Blue box is used by only 3 countries across the globe. And that is a subsidy that is given by the countries to the farmers to cap the production. मतलब तो इसमें कोई problem ही नहीं है as it is. So for example, कुछ countries इतना grow कर गई हैं कि वो कहती है तुम मत मेहनत करो, we'll pay you. We understand that by not producing something, obviously it is going to dent your income. You tell us our current income, we will pay you that much. But you stop. Norwegian countries like Sweden, Finland, they create blue box subsidies because they want to protect environment. So they think that India se मंगा लेंगे क्या है? Why to grow it here? You don't need to work hard when we have such a capital. So you just stop it and we will pay you for the deficit. And so that is why it is not even concerned because it has no relation with the market at all. Right? So what has relation with the market is the green box. Green box, there is no, yes. Repeat कर दो. ये नहीं समझ में आया? कैसे नहीं समझ में आया? जैसे for example, you know that agriculture is an environmentally damaging exercise. Why? Yeah, monocropping. Yeah, soil degradation. So there are a lot of environmental damages that you do. Also, you tend to, so for example, in case of India, you tend to export so much of water in form of rice. You know that water exports. Everyone understand water exports? So that smartly what these countries are doing is that they're shifting. क्या? हाँ, सबने तो नहीं पढ़ा ना बस असर से. Not everyone is that fortunate. Yeah. So water exports क्या होता है कि some developed countries, they understand that the cost of production is just not the cost of the final grain. It is even much more than that. So for example, when we sell rice for X number of kgs, in that the water intensity of the crop is not being reflected. So if there is a rich country which is saying instead of growing rice and depleting our underground water, let's import it from India, preserve our water. So India exports so much of water, just the fact that it exports so much of rice every year. Yes. And China, being traditionally rice producing country, is now importing a lot of rice from across the world because it wants to conserve its natural resource, because now it has the money to pay for it. for the environmental conservation. So now if a farmer has to be motivated to transition away from agriculture, to shake the agriculture, leave the agriculture, what is a just transition? How can you make this transition just? One is the Chinese model. नोटिफाई कर दिया और फिर जेल जाओगे अगर आपने एग्रीकल्चर किया. But then there is a democratic way, that there is a new scheme on which you can hop on voluntarily, and if you join it, we will compensate for your loss of income. That is called blue box. So that is generally utilized to put an upper cap on production or to wean away, nudge people away from. The problem here is that while there is no limit on blue box, there is very minimum limit on green box. The limits on amber box are very, very harsh. And the WTO keeps a track of on what amber box subsidy is being provided by every country to their farmers. And so it is capped for countries like India at 10% level. What is this 10%? So 10% of all the summation of all the agriculture production that you do, it should be limited to 10%. Obviously, India has breached it way before. The problem is that in Bali, the developed and developing countries were at heads. Developed countries were like, you have to cap it at 10%. Developing countries like India and China, they were not agreeing. And so a peace clause was signed that unless and until there is some consensus, because because WTO is a consensus-driven decision-making process, it follows that. That's why it's way more democratic. And that is what is one of the reasons why it is declining also. And so a peace clause was signed that the countries will explore the opportunities as to how to find the solution. Until then, the developing countries are allowed to breach it. But then it has become a pain point for the well-developed developing countries, or countries which are towards the between the transition to develop from developing transition from developing to developed world. It has become problematic because on one hand they have ensured the proper production, but then still vast majority of people for their daily income and household, they're dependent on agriculture. And these countries like these just want to buy 20 years before which they will be able to transition their most of the working people from agriculture to non-agriculture sectors like manufacturing or services sector, right? So that is the time that has been given, but let's see what happens. But this is the problem. And everywhere you will realize the idea is to show how developing countries are discriminated in WTO in almost every aspect, right? Okay, so agreement on agriculture, India, this is a problem. Let's talk about general agreement on trade and services. So how do you understand services? What are the different kinds of services that you can have? Services. बताओ.
Education, health, IT.
Yeah, so it is for health, education. So let's consider education. So what GATS does is that it categorizes the services into 4 modes. These are called modes because these are the modes through which the services can be provided, right? So different modes are mode 1.
Cross-border.
Yes, mode 2, mode 3, mode 4. Now, let's say you are from Punjab. So obviously, let's say you want to go to Canada for education. It's just a coincidence that I took such an example. There are various ways in which you can do it. If you come from a poor Punjabi family, not having to afford the education in Canada, what you can do is that you can just utilize some of the universities' tele-education program and avail the service from India. So services can be consumed while there is no transfer of people at all. That is the beauty of services. So you have to take care of that service also. So what once you become a member of General Agreement on Trade and Services, you are subject to the same conditions, which is non-discrimination clause. Non-discrimination clause includes MFN, then it includes national treatment, then it includes reciprocity. What it means is that if there is a educational service that Indians are consuming, and there is a tax on that, it has to follow. Now we understand what is MFN. So all the tele-educational should attract the same tax. Also, if Canada is, let's say, restricting in India's, let's say, IIT Delhi's program there, then India can do that. If it is not, India cannot. Both can levy at the same time. And obviously, reciprocity and national treatment. So you will not distinguish between a Swayam program of the government of India and the program that is being done by Canada. There is another way, however, which is like you come from a rich family and then you can literally go to the campus of this university, right? That is also possible. Now, in this case, to avail the same, almost the same service, there is a traveling of person which has involved. So you can see that how goods are different, services are different from goods. So trade in services have to be different from trade in goods. Another way is that because there are enough number of people from Punjab that are going to Canada, what Canada universities can do, that they can open their Canadian campuses in India. अरे यार यहाँ मत आओ, फिर पंजाबी लोग कहेंगे कोई मतलब ही नहीं रहा फिर तो एजुकेशन का, तुम तो यहीं आ गए अमृतसर में. So, so what happens is that if they open, let's say the University of Quebec opens its center, this is the third and a very unique way where the service provider reaches to the doors of the service availer. And that obviously will require cross-border transition, not only of last mode, transfer of people who worked as servers. So if the Quebec University has to provide services, there is no obligation on that these campuses that this service will be provided by Indians only. So just like you cannot have a minimum local requirement in goods, you cannot have minimum people requirement that if you're opening a campus of Harvard University in Delhi, all the people should be from DU or JNU. No, they can hire and fire anyone to provide education into the local campuses of foreign universities. So these are the only 4 ways in which services can vary among each other, which is like a software developer in US providing its software services in India. Indians going to US to avail the software facilities, either through internet or physically relocating there. Microsoft opening its campuses in India. So we have a campus in Noida and Bangalore in Hyderabad. This is mode 3 that has to be protected. And finally, Microsoft can notify even an American national as an India CEO. You cannot stop that from happening whatsoever. All 4 categories of modes are protected under GATS once you become a member of WTO. So it's everything or nothing package. WTO is all about everything or nothing. You cannot just pick and choose कि मेरे को ये वाला चाहिए, ये मेरे को ठीक लग रहा है. This is not to my liking. No, you cannot take that offer. You will have to agree to everyone. There is now here the problem is that although India is a party to General Agreement on Trade and Services, although India is a part of WTO, the problem is that services still continue to be heavily regulated and restricted by various kinds of rules and regulations. And that what create India's penetration into China. That's what create India's penetration into all the developed markets, because although they have allowed entry into services sector, but then the qualification and technical requirements So for example, India might produce the best lawyers in the world, but these lawyers will not be able to practice in London and in USA. They will not be able to provide their legal services. Why? Because their LLB is from National Law University, Bangalore, which is probably the best in the world. But then it does not subject, because to practice as a counselor in US, you have to have a degree from the US, whatever is their affiliation. Because that's why services are so different from trade. And that's what create problem what we can do to protect mode 1, mode 2, mode 3, mode 4, if most of our technical, so for example, if you are Indian CA topper, can you do auditing in US, in Canada? No, you cannot do that. So you have to qualify CFA. So because of this, these kinds of multiple, this is just one type of barriers. Then you have visa barriers. If every category of visa requires a minimum income. So for example, if you are a lawyer and you want to initiate, you're a doctor, पहले तो आप यहाँ पे 6-7 साल लगा के डॉक्टर बनते हो, फिर then you again spend 3 to 4 years to qualify American minimum requirement to practice as a medical person. And so for example, as soon as your education is done, you have to get a new visa to practice as a doctor, which requires that if you want to practice as a doctor in US and you are not from America, you will have to have an offer of minimum $1 lakh per annum. Only then you will be given a visa, which means you're so qualified that let's say hospitals are ready to pay you that much. So that H1B के लिए भी एक minimum requirement है. So the minimum income requirement stops most of the people. So now you can see that how non-tariff barrier work in various complex ways. And so it is not at all useful for India in any way, because whatever services India excel or Indians excel in, they are subject to various other norms which GATS does not takes into account. And that's why India pushes for amendment or modification of GATS. So India says, whatever you say in IPR, we will do if you amend agreement on agriculture and GATS. So that's like a deal, give and take चल रहा है, quid pro quo चल रहा है. वो उधर बज नहीं करते, हम इधर बज नहीं करते. Because हम इधर नहीं करते, वो उधर नहीं करते. Right? Okay, so this is GATS. Then you have dispute resolution, which is dysfunction. Let's come to TRIPS. What is TRIPS? Trade related intellectual property rights. Now we understand why protection of intellectual property right is very important, because nothing will help in a capitalist system if intellectual property right is not protected, because it rides on the protection of intellectual property, because that is what gives the original inventor and the producer the sole right, and that is what the motivation is. That's why you invest so much. So it is believed that the jurisdictions which protect the patents, protects the property right, generally see higher tendency of innovation, higher tendencies of capital expenditure, because then people are motivated. आज खर्चे हो रहे हैं 500 crore, let it be, we will recover it. That is the motivation, and that's why more rich people invest in IPR, because they're like, अगर एक भी पेटेंट मिल गया तो फिर तो उसका 20 साल तक तो एकदम वो कर देना है. And so once you become a
What
part of
about the
W,
waiver in COVID vaccines that TRIPS gave?
yeah, so we'll come to the COVID case. That those are the problems which happen because of the so it's not like none of the countries ever protected the property rights. Most of the developing world also protected property rights. So India also had the patent laws, copyright laws, GI tag laws. It's not like India did not have. The problem is that every country had their own kind of national legislations and different level of tolerance to the intellectual property right, which is what created problem to the Western worlds. So what if you become a member, you have to modify. Now you can understand in how many ways the national sovereignty is compromised. Modify the national laws to meet certain minimum requirements. What are those requirements? In every, first and foremost, what is the category of protection that we are providing you? There has to be a separate law in each of them. This is the first requirement. So you can't say मैंने तो patent कर दिया है, अब copyright की बात मत करो यार. नहीं. Create a law to protect copyright, create a law to protect patents, create a law to protect industrial design, create a law to protect trademarks, create a law to protect GI tags, create a law to protect plant varieties. And so whatever is the list, the country has to create a national legislation. The problem is this is not a violation of sovereignty. Violation of sovereignty is that in every one of them, the minimum requirement is specified. So once you become a member of WTO, you will have to come up with the modification proposal, you sign it, then go back and enact these, and only then you will become a member of TRIPS. So they specify that create a copyright law which protects what? Writings Music creation, audio visual creation for 50 years. So अरिजीत सिंह को 50 साल तक पैसा मिलेगा सैड सॉन्ग्स गाने के लिए. When you want to create patent protection, you have to protect the patents for 20 years to the level that they want you to do it. So India had protection, but India what did? That India protected the process to create a product. But they say process se nahi hoga, product patent provide karo. So India had to modify its laws. So what is the difference between process and product?
So India, the product with the same
If a
product.
product is patented, you with any other process you can manufacture the same product. But if the process is patented, you cannot manufacture it.
Is this clear to everyone or is there any doubt? Yeah. So let's say a new medicine is created A, starting with X being combined with Y, and then after this combination, both of them combined with Z to give A. What India say is that we are not going to protect A. Paracetamol nahi protect karenge hum. This is not protected. What is protected is that no one can create paracetamol by combining XY and then combining it with Z. And then there is a new manufacturer which says, sir, पहले हम X को heat करते हैं, उसको Z से combine कर देते हैं, और फिर उसको Y से combine करते हैं to give A. It's fine because it is different, sir. They combine X with Y first. Same salt. So what India has to begin with, India incentivize investment into processes. And so what developed countries did is that whenever they came up with a new product, they never came up with the new products into Indian market to begin with. Because as soon as they will come, they know कि ये तो बहुत intelligent लोग हैं, ये तो नया process निकाल लेंगे, and that will not be protected. Also, they say that compulsory licensing clause will be limited to extreme medical health emergency, to which India responded by giving the compulsory licenses to Natco Pharma. The problem is that India did not violate the clause of WTO. Compulsory licensing is that if there is a new product, so hepatitis C's new product comes from Bayer Pharma. Bayer Pharma पता है? German company है. Hitler. It was, I mean, every German company has this dark phase. वो देखा होगा, where you should not ask them what they did between 1933 and 1945. Because Bayer is world's largest producer of pharmaceutical, and it became so because they had access to the Jews concentration camp, where they could have carried out any experimentation on live humans. So यहाँ पे अमेरिकन गोरिल्ला पे कर रहे हैं, बंदर पे कर रहे हैं, फिर देख रहे हैं ह्यूमंस पे होगा slowly and gradually. वहाँ कोई फर्क नहीं पड़ता है. So I think you're referring to the same documentary. This documentary was that there are written letters where they asked on a very regular basis कि हमें 200-300 लोग भेज दो, वो पुराने वाले तो मर चुके हैं. And they used to supply 300, 400, 200, 150 people from Jews concentration camp for the research that has to be conducted by the Bayer. हाँ मतलब क्या होगा, मतलब उसकी डॉक्यूमेंट्री नहीं देखी मैंने. So NATCO, so compulsory licensing means that you can violate these provisions if there is an extreme health situation. India, because India is one of the best intellectual community, has the best intellectual community among all the developing countries, utilized this provision, understood the final reading कि ये तो हम कर सकते हैं, because what their product costed us 65 lakhs for one pill. But then it will treat hepatitis C, which is not usually non-treatable. Cure हो जाएगा आपका hepatitis. It is expensive. And then Natco Pharma आया, कहा ये लो 18,000 रुपए. And then it created a furor across the globe. That how can you issue compulsory licensing? क्या सब लोग को hepatitis B हो रहा है? क्या 10% population? There is very minute community that has hepatitis C, and you have invoked this section. Well, we consider it as a health situation, and we will justify it. So the problem was not that India used it. The problem was that India gave a hint how you can utilize the exceptions given under IPR, and then these companies started worrying कि ये जो बाकी पाकिस्तान वालों को तो पता ही नहीं था इसके बारे में, अब तो ये लीक हो गया. तो अब क्या होगा कि when India can do it, then 70 other countries will be enabled and empowered to do it. So we have to remove the compulsory licensing. So now developed countries are saying that we will verify what is the emergency, and then only you can issue compulsory licensing. And then India has vetoed that section because the amendment will come only through consensus. India has stopped that. एंड देन दे आर सेइंग कि चलो फिर इस पे तो फिर एग्रीमेंट ऑन एग्रीकल्चर पे आ जाओ, तो वही हो रहा है कि no, generic is different. Generic is that once this 20-year period gets over, then the patent obligation is over. Now anyone can make that utilizing the same process, utilizing different process, you can know. But the problem with the product patent is that, let's say in 2000, year 2000, a company got, let's say, a chemical A which cures a particular disease in the form of caps, in the form of tablet, right? ऐसे ही होते हैं, बीच में से कटे होते हैं. So let's say that is an antibiotic which is active against gram-negative bacteria. तो 2020 में expire हो जाना चाहिए था. So in 2020, any other manufacturer should be able to make the same salt. The problem is,
Evergreen of patents.
yes. So in 2019, the same company, what it will do is that it will withdraw this from the market. पहले withdraw करेगी. And just on 1st January 2020, they will launch the same in the capsule form because the product is changed. Minor modification. This is called hopping of patents or evergreening. And then they will apply and they will get the patent on this also. And then they will force other countries to not manufacture the same salt because it is just not about the salt, it is about the capsule. So this whole medicine is capsule plus the salt inside. Both are patented. So now you, for next 20 years, you cannot produce it just by doing minor modification. In some cases, only the colors were also changed to get the new, and that is how some of the medicines have been extended 100 years of patent because of this in US market. So now people are raising questions even in the efficacy of the patent, because we wanted to protect patents because we wanted to enable some minimum income to the person who has invested his mind, her mind in money, and to ensure a minimum return on the investment. Now you can see how it is being misutilized. So the problem with the IPR is that it now creates bottleneck in various ways. It creates artificial scarcity to begin with. समझ में आ रहा है? How it will create artificial scarcity? If the patent would have expired in 2020, other people would have manufactured the same product, and so the supply of the product would have increased through generic medicine. But then you stopped other people, and now you are the only producer, so you can reduce and increase the supply, reduce and increase the market price to dictate demand and supply. So it is artificial, it has been misused by the developed countries. And problem is that in most of the markets, in most of the sections of goods and services, Western countries and their companies are the first one to launch anything. So they are the first penetrator, they are the creators of the market. जैसे वो bottled water का कोई market था नहीं 20 साल पहले, market create किया गया है. So that's how these companies create market. And when they create market, they obviously get the first patent because that is usually the first product that the humanity sees. यार यार ऐसा भी कुछ हो सकता है क्या? जैसे smartphone. Correct? Smartphone, no one would have thought in 1980s कि ऐसा कुछ होगा. That we'll be able to communicate remotely without any connection with the wire. That happened. And so you will see that most of the patents for these mobile manufacturing, the new technologies generally held under industrial design with the developed countries. And so it not only creates artificial, it deters research and development. Now, if you are a rich person in India, what will you prefer? Let's say if you have 1,000 crore, probably you have no other option but to invest in real estate. आप जमीन खरीदोगे, कुछ और करोगे, because you understand that investment in research and development is not of any help. क्या ही मिल जाएगा आपको? How can you beat them in IPR if the IPR laws are so strict? And that's why it deters innovation and research, the purpose for which it was originally brought. So India's concerns with these are obviously that we are going to use the compulsory licensing more often than you can allow, and you cannot do anything about it. But then everything is stuck in last 6-7 years. There is no progress. So in everyone, subsidy में bifurcation है, services में bifurcation है. समझ में आ रहा है ना? What is the issue of developed versus developing countries? Let's move to trims. Before moving to trims is something where the agreement is of no use because
Sir,
yes.
सर कंपल्सरी लाइसेंस और पेटेंट वेवर में क्या फर्क होता है?
Compulsory licensing में what you do is that the government issues a license saying that now we are giving you the exceptions under the India's IPR laws, and we are giving you the permission, and we will protect you against any obligations arising of this war. Waiver is that that particular category is removed from any kind of patenting. Yeah. So that is a waiver कि इसमें तो लगेगा ही नहीं IPR, but उसमें क्या है, एक particular company को identify करके लाइसेंस दिया जाता है. Here waiver extends to the entire sector कि इसका इस सेक्टर में अप्लाई होना ही नहीं चाहिए, like that. टाइम हो गया यार. Let's start with quickly trims. Trims में क्या है? It is about investment. The problem is that the flow of global capital should not be restricted. What are the constraints to the flow of global capital that you can think of? FRBM? FCRA भी नहीं है. FCRA कहाँ लगता है? Regulates. नहीं,
तो
for
वो
example.
FDI लिमिट्स जो होती है
हाँ
75%, 74%, 49% वाली जो लिमिट्स है, ऑटोमेटिक
Yes.
रूट, गवर्नमेंट रूट.
Very good. Correct. But even before that, then there are limits on current account transaction and capital account transaction, even before that.
Convertibility.
Yes. So how much of the percent, how much dollars can flow into India and how much dollars can flow outside of India in a day is a current account. Generally, if that is with respect to payment against goods and services. So this is called current account convertibility. How much of the dollars can come to India and be invested in a factory? And then how much of the dollar can withdraw itself from a factory and go back to US is capital account, which leads to a creation of asset generation. How much foreign investment can be, how much dollars can be invested in construction of road? And once you're not happy, you can withdraw how much. There is a limit. There is a limit because there is a capacity in which that amount can be converted by RBI. If all the foreign investment had to be taken back today, RBI will not be able to pay it because it is $3 trillion and RBI just has $600 billion as foreign reserve. So that's why we have continued with the current account, limits on current account convertibility. It is not fully convertible, but India knows that goods and services में exchange में now we are empowered. We have almost what we give to the world, we import. There is a little bit of less in what we export. And so that can be taken care of, right? Payments of goods and services, because it is almost at the equal level. थोड़ा सा नीचे है तो वो हम मीट कर लेंगे क्योंकि इन्वेस्टमेंट ज्यादा आता है तो यहाँ से हम उधर ट्रांसफर कर देते हैं. That is what RBI does. There is no question on, so then this is the first. This is just at the border as it enters. But when it enters within the border, there are limits. There used to be limits in every field. Defense में zero नहीं कर सकते. You cannot send money to India to be invested in production of missile, production of helicopters. You cannot do that if you want to spend in space technology. You could not have done that if it dealt with any of the infrastructure project, automobile. So in 1991, even a single penny could not be invested, even a bread factory. After 1991, we started liberalizing the sectors, reducing the regulated to the level that in 2024, even you can spend in defense and space. The only sector where you cannot spend is nuclear. So barring one sector, there's no. The problem is that the trade-related aspects of in the trade-related investment measures have been completely dysfunctional because there is no agreement on how these should be regulated. None of the countries had consensus. At the same time, what countries did is that they parallelly started negotiating for bilateral investment treaties, correct? Almost each country in liberal framework has signed bilateral investment treaty with each other. So India has with Canada, India has with Sri Lanka here. Also at the same time, they started multilateral regional foreign trade agreements, which were mainly about how the investments will be made. Because the consensus could not be reached under the trade-related investment measure Doha development, the countries found it way more beneficial to negotiate in smaller groups because it becomes easier. And so either you have regional trade agreements, right? Like SAFTA, ASEAN has its own regional trade agreement, Northern America has its own NAFTA. So almost you can see everyone, European Union is almost borderless. So don't even think about It's like a country, one market. It's already one market, one currency exists there. And so TRIMS became totally useless because it became very difficult for 150 countries to come upon a consensus. And it is even more difficult because what is known as spaghetti ball model, because when you look at the spaghetti, it looks like this. This is even, it is more, it has been shown as less simpler, less complex than it actually exists. So I took the image which was the least. So when I went for the actual image, ऐसा कुछ दिख ही नहीं रहा था उसमें. You can't see the map. This is what shows relation of one country with another and how they treat others' investments. And so it is so complicated that there cannot be any consensus on trade-related investment measure. There is no what has happened as a result of success of bilateral investment treaties in negotiating the investment measures among and between countries, that it has done most damage to WTO framework, because now the countries are thinking, we can resolve these disputes so easily in investments. We can do so in the goods. We can do that in services also. And so the emboldening of this is what is known as minilateralism. Countries in the group of 3 to 4 negotiating a common consensus among each other, which are not directly WTO in violation of WTO, to arising at a consensus. And so that has become one of the main reasons why the countries are losing interest in WTO. Because it becomes very easier to arrive at consensus when you are negotiating in the group of 3 to 4 countries. Also, when they create investment model, they create an arbitration mechanism. जैसे इंडिया वोडाफोन का यूके में चल रहा है, it is related to the Indian, it is a violation of India and UK bilateral investment treaty. So when India UK signed the bilateral investment treaty, they decided that if there will be any dispute related to a company's investment in India or Indian companies investment in UK, it will be through a third party arbitrator, which will be in London. That's why the case went to London. Now, the success of the private arbitration model is so good that people are finding it way better as compared to the dispute resolution mechanism. So it is like a parallel set of dispute resolution that is turning out to be more effective. And so companies are thinking, if we can do this in investment, let's do this in trade of goods also. Let's extend this to trade of services also. So you can see that ASEAN, if you have read about ASEAN, ASEAN has created a regional trade agreement where one service is recognized by the other service qualification. So if you are from Indonesia and you are a doctor, you can practice in Malaysia also. If you are a CA from Myanmar, you can practice in Brunei also. No problem at all. It is so there is a complete recognition of each other's qualifications. There is no problem in that. And they have modified each one's domestic qualification standards to meet everyone's requirement. That is what you call a real recognition. And that's when you can have a good service integration. Until WTO has not agreed on that. Okay, so last one is dispute resolution. And this is the reason because of which WTO, to whatever extent it was functional, it has become completely dysfunctional. It has become completely dysfunctional because US has bottlenecked the dispute resolution mechanism under the Trump administration. Trump administration made statements that US will withdraw from WTO. And if that happens, that will be obviously the last blow to WTO. But it is not possible practically. It is not possible because why is it not possible for US to come out? Do you think it is possible economically? It is not possible because the day you will withdraw yourself from the WTO, you will not get the benefit of MFN from any of the 200 odd countries that we have. So they have the power on the next day to increase the import duty without any legal obligation arising from US. They can do that immediately. If we withdraw from WTO, there is no obligation on India to treat Microsoft at par with Wipro. So that can be discriminated. So India can say Microsoft के softwares वैसे तो कोई खरीदता नहीं है, pirated ही होते हैं, लेकिन generally let's say whatever जैसे video games आजकल portal पे आ रहे हैं, कब मैं देखा है उसको protect करना आसान है. So then they can say that all the video games coming from EA Sports will attract 200% import duty. So you can be country specific once that country is out of WTO. तो वहाँ के जो manufacturers and service providers हैं, they will not allow it to happen. Also, it's legally impossible, not impossible, because then the bill will go to Congress where it has to be approved by both Senate as well as House of Representatives, which will be difficult. The problem with dispute resolution mechanism is that 7 days, 7 people sit in various capacities and decide. The minimum quorum to meet or admit a new dispute is 3. So if there are not 3 judges, they cannot admit a new case. Quorum समझ में आता है? Parliament का quorum कितना है? 1/10, which is, yeah. So if there are, let's say, 545 members, so minimum is 54.5, which means 55. 55 is the minimum. 3 people. What US did is that US vetoed the appointment, started vetoing the appointment since 2018. 2 members to be appointed this year, vetoed, goes down to 5, 2 next year. It remained less than 3. And so they have not been able to resolve any dispute since then, even till now. Why US did this is one of the reasons why US is not happy, and most likely either will lead to radical reform or because US is losing interest. We'll see why US is losing interest. Is because US says that first and foremost, there is a binding obligation on 90 days on them to resolve the matter. US House of Representatives has produced reports which says that on an average they take way more than that. So they breach it without even asking the countries that can we breach it. So no permission is asked before breaching the 90 days limit. Also, when they analyze their judgments, Americans comment, वो पढ़ा हो ना 301 USTR report आती है जो पढ़ा है 301 USTR report. Anyone knows about it? US Trade Representatives 301 report. पढ़ा होगा यार, current affairs में रहता है काफी. India's generally found their name. So it is like a US Trade Representatives, a group of American manufacturers and suppliers. They like जैसे कि if FICCI है इंडिया में. So what they do is that every year they release a report where they detail, write down important countries and what are the laws that US and US companies have gone through because of their WTO obligation violations. So this is their observation that say that we are not happy with dispute resolution. Their judgments, first and foremost, frequently goes against the mandate that has been given to the WTO. They make commentaries which has nothing to do with the dispute that is being decided. So when I was reading this, I was like, कोई Indian judge है क्या retired? Going beyond the mandate, and then commentaries which are not related to the case, oral commentaries. And so US, but then there was none. So I was surprised. So problem is that they go beyond the mandate. The dispute involves a lot of violation of kind, sort of, and commentaries that go beyond that have nothing to do with the case. And also, what they say that they have an association among themselves. If one of them retires, then what they do is that if the person who is retiring was a part of that dispute settlement, even after retirement, he will remain the part until and unless the case is resorted. So retire होके वो let's say France चला गया, अब उसको हर बार उसको वापस बुलाएंगे, and the current sitting 7 members will have no role. One extra member, if that was a panel of 5 members, one of them is retired, he will come back, she will come back every time. And that is, they say that this is their internal creation to perpetuate salaries, allowances, honorariums and everything. So the US blocked the reappointment of all of them and never allowed to make it dysfunctional so that the reforms can be forced upon dispute resolution mechanism. Right. But the problem is that there is no consensus on as to what reform that can be done. After all, they are judges. So unless and until it comes from within, apart from them, there are certain general issues because of which WTO is most likely going to become dysfunctional. FTAs is one of them we have discussed. So there are certain issues which go beyond WTO's own problems. It is related to rise of China. Why rise of China is problematic? The US interest in WTO is declining because US is not unilaterally able to dictate the terms of IMF, dictate the terms of World Bank, and dictate the terms of WTO. So it became the vehicle of American imperialism, neo-imperialism for 30 years because America was जिसको चाहता था उसको डायरेक्टर बनाता था IMF का, वर्ल्ड बैंक का. So you know that there is a trend. IMF का डायरेक्टर हमेशा हमें यूरोपियन होता है, वर्ल्ड बैंक का हमेशा अमेरिकन होता है. As how is it possible? So it is because it allowed that to happen. But now increasing influence of China and China's non-adherence with most of the clauses of WTO with impunity makes US believe that now it is WTO is of no use because it cannot force China. So for example, China violates national treatment on a day-to-day basis. For all practical purposes, it is a non-market economy. But WTO does not have the capacity to say it. जैसे WHO के पास capacity नहीं थी बोलने की कि वो कुछ गड़बड़ तो हो रहा है वहां पे. The fun fact है कि 20th February को 2020, there is from the official handle of WHO, they tweeted that there is no concrete evidence to show that COVID-19 is transmissible from one human to another human. Can you believe that? और 20 दिन के अंदर पूरी दुनिया में फैला हुआ था वो. 1 lakh people had already been infected, and that then WHO had the audacity to say this. First case were observed in September. It reached its peak in December. January भी निकल गया. February में you are saying this, that no human to human transmission, no concrete evidence to say. And so this is reflected in the functioning of all the global institutions. Where the China is not able to dictate the terms, it creates parallel set of institutions to make it. So World Bank में नहीं dictate कर पाया, अपना ब्रिक्स भी खड़ा कर लिया, और फिर एशियन डेवलपमेंट बैंक जापानीज कंट्रोल्ड है. न्यू डेवलपमेंट बैंक में भी उसका इंटरेस्ट नहीं है, क्योंकि बिकॉज न्यू डेवलपमेंट बैंक ऑल्सो इन्वॉल्व्स इन द डिसीजन मेकिंग द ब्रिक्स कंट्रीज. AIIB. दैट्स व्हाई ब्रिक्स में भी इंटरेस्ट खत्म हो चुका है चाइना का, क्योंकि जस्ट लाइक यूएस, चाइना को पता है कि ये हमने 2 मैकेनिज्म, कंटिजेंसी रिजर्व अरेंजमेंट और वो जो उन्होंने किया है, that is of no use because then that will be dictated by these member countries also. So this is one. China, US is losing interest because of various reasons. Now we understand various reasons. At the same time, because WTO is consensus based, where you have nothing until you have everything approach, the problem is that developing countries are 2/3 of the total membership. So earlier they were not vocal about their rights. Now they have come to be vocal, led by mainly India and China. And so now it is like a give and take. The problem is that earlier developed countries did not have to do anything in order to bring along the developing countries. Now developing countries are sitting there as a group asking them, if you carry out these reforms, we will do it for you. So if you agree to agreement on agriculture, allow us peace clause for more time. If you give us relief in IPR, and if you provide the mutual recognition of services, then maybe we can consider your requests of reform of dispute resolution mechanism. And then we can maybe think about also extending IPR services, IPR regulation in various fields, and strict enforcement that you worry about so much, that in India, enforcement is very low in IPR. We will create officers for enforcement, we'll show you. But once you have to agree to. So because it is consensus based, in Doha development, there is no improvement except for trade facilitation. You now you understand trade facilitation. So the last time when anything successful happened in Bali. It did happen in Bali, where in 2013 the countries agreed to implement the trade facilitation, where common set of entry and exit regulations will be designed by every country. So ऐसा नहीं है कि you enter Dubai and then the procedure, the form is very different. Then you go to India and then you go to Sri Lanka, the procedure are different. Now the procedures have been homogenized throughout the globe. So it will fasten the process. We understood that this is one of the non-tariff barriers. Now you can create complicated procedure. हमने तो कोई ड्यूटी नहीं लगाई, but the procedure themselves are so complicated that it becomes very difficult for an imported commodity to enter the market. So the trade facilitation is the so consensus based है, because it is consensus based, most of them radical reform require consensus. The consensus are not nowhere near horizon. Because consensus are nowhere in horizon, it again reinforces the minilateralism for every matter. So you will see more and more matters going out of the WTO. Also, when there are minor issues, then they are decided by simple majority. And there, the 2/3 members are developing. Also, the last problem that WTO faces, which developed countries do not agree, is the differential treatment, which provides the developing countries. What is differential treatment? Yeah. So in all the clauses, you will see when you will read the main constitution of TRIPS, let's say, you will say that the developed countries have to do it by 2002, and then developing countries can do it by 2022, like that. So this is the differential treatment. Similarly, in reduction of tariff, the reduction is not as much anticipated immediately by the developing countries. So everywhere, developing countries are given option of delaying the reforms to be implemented under the commitment that they have made. The problem is that the designation of developing is on the basis of self-declaration. You declare yourself as developing and you will get the exemption. The problem is that there are 7 countries in this developing out. So there are total around, I think, 110 countries which are developing under WTO. India is one of them. China is one of them. There are 7 developing countries which are a part of G20. The problem is the developed country says that we need to reform it, but then it is blocked by India. So unilaterally, US made it null and void its general subsidy program GSP just for India and China, saying that for all practical purposes, you have stopped existing as a developing country. It is a violation of WTO, but still nothing could be done against it. Because self-declaration allows India to exist as a developing country for as long as they want. And so developed countries say that we should amend this self-declaration by saying that if you are either a member of OECD or a member of G20, or there is a per capita national income criteria, there are multiple parameters that they have designed. Unless and until you meet those standards, you cannot be declared. So first and foremost, they demand self-declaration to go. The declaration should be from WTO, and that should be based on your membership into premium clubs or your income criteria. If you fail to meet both them, you cannot be developing and you cannot perpetually get the benefit, to which developing countries don't agree. Yeah. So because of these reasons, WTO has become completely ineffective as of now. There is no progress. The last is the Doha development round. So under Doha development round, the countries agreed to resolve these issues. But since then, since 2010-11, there is no progress. So that's why we say Doha development. Whenever you will hear about WTO, you will hear about Doha, because that's the last set. So in Uruguay, we created these mechanisms. These issues were identified before Doha. In Doha, all the countries thought that they could resolve those issues, but none of the issues could be resolved except for trade facilitation and peace clause given to agreement on agriculture. Still, there is no progress in WTO. Is this point clear, online people? Yeah. ठीक है?
सर ये जो WTO मिनिस्ट्रियल राउंड होते हैं यही होते हैं ना सर, ये दोहा डेवलपमेंट?
हाँ, मिनिस्ट्रियल, यस, मिनिस्ट्रियल राउंड्स होते हैं, बट या
एवरी सेकंड ईयर होते हैं, मतलब
एवरी सेकंड ईयर होता है, जैसे कि UNFCC
तो फिर मतलब उसमें से फेमस है दोहा डेवलपमेंट राउंड और उरुग्वे राउंड, है ना?
उरुग्वे राउंड में फाइनलाइज हुआ WTO, और जो उसके रिफॉर्म, जो इसको इश्यूज थे, वो ये था टेबल पे, देवर ऑन टेबल दैट दे विल बी रिजॉल्व, बट दे स्टिल नाउ कैन have never been resolved, and that's why we say Doha development round, क्योंकि उसके बाद कोई प्रोग्रेस ही नहीं है. Every time they meet, both the sides are on forefront. ये उनके इश्यूज दिखाते हैं तो वो उनके इश्यूज दिखा देते हैं कि देखो ये भी तो नहीं हुआ है, and both of them know that it's on the consensus. So no one can do anything about it. Is this point clear, आदित्य? ठीक है, प्रेशर ग्रुप्स कभी और कर लेंगे। क्योंकि वो ऐसे नहीं हो पाएगा, प्लस आज वी आर डूइंग डीएनएस ऑन संडे आल्सो, so there's a new guy who will do it in a different way, so I have to go. No, this is, I mean, I'll come, मैं राहुल से बात कर लूंगा for 1 hour. I'll come and I'll teach pressure groups. It will not take more than 45 minutes. और प्लस मैंने रिवाइज भी नहीं किया ये ज़्यादा बड़ा इशू है, किया होता तो मैं पढ़ा देता। ठीक है, चलो, ओके, बाय बाय।